Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 7th of July, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, great to have you back.
Great to be with you again, Brian.
What a day. Chilcot, as we'll be seeing in a minute. But we're also delighted to say that we've got Mark Anderson from American Free Press. He'll be speaking with us by live video Skype link from the depths of Michigan. We are allowed just to comment on the weather. It's pretty grim. We understand it's not too bad in the States, and we're going to leave it there.
Leave it there.
Okay.
There's a big cloud over Westminster this morning.
There's a big cloud over Westminster, and we hope it grows. But we'll just give Brexit a mention, because we're going to say it's remarkable that Brexit nearly appears to have been Chilcotted.
Yeah, the Brexit deception has been bumped off by the Chilcot cop-out.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, well, that's the mention of the man. Let's bring him on screen, because this famous inquiry, 2.6 million words, in order to, do what? Well, we'll bring the terms of reference really up on the screen. This is what the man said. That basically the purpose of the Chilcot inquiry is to examine the United Kingdom's involvement in Iraq, including the way decisions were made and actions taken, to establish as accurately and reliably as possible what happened, and to identify lessons that can be learned. The inquiry is considering the period from 2001 up to the end of July 2009. So straightforward there. What do you make of that, Patrick?
I don't make a whole lot out of it based on what you said there. So, I mean, we'll get through it, but there's nothing there.
There's nothing there.
That's my opinion.
Right.
It's just a big, giant, thick, expensive book that's been produced with no substance at all.
Okay.
And no evidence either, just commentary on evidence.
So it's a nice inquiry to learn a few things, but nothing too troubled. Move on.
Yeah, but we'll show you some real evidence in this program.
Okay, well, let's look at the man again, because it's always interesting to see Mr. Chilcot there in the full spotlight, talking right honourable gentleman's language, very calm, measured, and really nothing to see. Well, we thought we'd just take the lid off. And let's remind people about the reality of Iraq, because, of course, never mind the violence on the battlefield. Where did it lead to? Some delightful pictures here, Patrick. This is the reality of what we achieved in Iraq. Torture, brutality, some of the most disgusting scenes, I think, probably that this country has seen as a result of its own forces at work. Mm. And we are going to make an apology today. So we'll read out what's on screen. As the lies, deceit, propaganda and spin of Tony Blair's British government emerged, the UK column would like to apologise to the people of Iraq for war, genocide and torture that were not done under our name nor under the name of the vast majority of people in the United Kingdom. So the one thing that seems to have been totally forgotten in Chilcot is the reality of what was going on. People were being blown apart, shot, killed, tortured, raped. And this was the result of what we unleashed on Iraq.
National humiliation for the people of Iraq. And might I add that the country was looted of a lot of its antiquities. That was immediately one of the targets, it seemed. And
the ancient relics.
The ancient relics and the ancient sites totally defaced, destroyed. So that is our collective human history. Part of it is wiped out in this deceptive operation, and war with it was waged on false pretenses. On false pretenses.
They're all little mistakes, and Chilcot Report is going to say, well, we did get some things wrong, but we just need to move on and carry on as normal. Well, let's bring in the archvillain, which has got to be Tony Blair. Many people saying that when he gave his press conference, he was looking a little bit peaky, eyes moving all over the place. So let's have a look at some of the things he said. The decision to go to war in Iraq and to remove Saddam Hussein from power in a coalition of over 40 countries led by the United States of America was the hardest most momentous, most agonising decision I took in my 10 years as British Prime Minister. Sincere, you watched a bit of it this morning, Patrick. What did you make of him?
I think he was sincere in that he was regretting what it might have done to his own personal, reputation as an international businessman now, ex-politician. But I don't think he was sincere because the last person he mentioned on his list during the speech, and I do encourage people to go listen to this speech by Tony Blair, he named, "I'm sorry for the British Armed Forces, I'm sorry for the families, I'm sorry for everybody in Britain." And the last person is almost an afterthought.
Yeah.
He said, or the people of Iraq, not and the people of Iraq. So follow the NLP. When Tony Blair speaks, follow the NLP, and usually you'll get the idea of what the thrust of what he's saying is intended to do.
Yeah.
And the Iraq people should have been mentioned first and foremost, and that should be 99% of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because this war was waged, as we'll show you in a few minutes, in total violation and absence of any international law. And that is the legacy of what Tony Blair has done: obliterated, hamstrung, and destroyed any adherence to international law. He was the man, he was the key person to knock that down and create the lawlessness that we see today.
Yeah.
The lawlessness that has paved the road to Damascus right now. Tony Blair is 100% the key choke point in this part of history.
Okay, well, let's follow on through some of his comments. This is a bit more of it. He says, "For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe." Well, I've had great difficulty believing this because I think it's just a piece of utter theatre in front of the cameras. I don't pick any remorse up from this man. I see every word that came out of his mouth carefully crafted to try and deceive the picture. He's got to try and build an image that he's actually got some compassion inside him. I look at his eyes, I think, well, these are the eyes of a killer if I didn't know better.
Mm.
And what have we got here? As the report makes clear, there were no lies. Parliament and Cabinet were not misled. There was no secret commitment to war. Intelligence was not falsified, and the decision was made in good faith. Well, all of that is complete nonsense, is a complete lie, because the report is not doing anything of the kind.
And what we see again and again with Tony Blair's fake mea culpa here is he keeps commenting on what the report says. This is what the report has proven. This is what the report shows. And his gang as well are all doing the same.
So he's a pretty clever man, because he said he didn't really get advanced knowledge of a report of 2.6 million words, and he encourages people to go and look. So he already knows in those 2.6 million words, he already knows that it completely exonerates him, which it doesn't. So let's follow on. He says this: "It's claimed by some that by removing Saddam, we caused the terrorism today in the Middle East, and that it would have been better to have left him in power. I profoundly disagree." What do we say to that?
This is like, Himmler getting up at Nuremberg and saying that, I really thought that, yes, we did destroy half of Europe and kill millions of people and start World War II, but I think
we were right.
I really believed that I made the right decision at the time, and I stand by that. Where does that leave you? It's just a lot of conviction. But conviction for what? Conviction for breaking and destroying the concept of international law. In fact, basically violating the Nuremberg principles openly. An undeclared war of aggression. Yeah. Isn't that what it was?
I think so.
That's exactly what it was. So how is Tony Blair going to sit in history is the question, Brian. And it depends. We have to basically expunge everything we learned at the Nuremberg trials.
Well, that only applies to some people. It doesn't apply to these people. It doesn't apply to Tony Blair.
It only applies to whoever was in the dock at that time.
If he sits in history in prison, I will personally be very happy. But there's more of it, I'm afraid. There was about 50 minutes of it. The coalition planned for one set of ground facts and encountered another. And a nation whose people we wanted to set free and secure from the evil Saddam became instead victim to sectarian terrorism. It wasn't really us. We were doing the right thing. We did make a few odd mistakes, and unfortunately that unleashed a few little problems and a few little people got hurt, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and of course he's blaming it conveniently on sectarian terrorism. So he's saying, oh, this is an unfortunate byproduct of the whole affair and sectarian between Sunnis and Shiites. You remember the story where British SAS soldiers dressed as Arabs firing into a crowd?
And got caught.
Yeah. And then we had to spring them from a jail in Basra. They basically reversed a tank into the back of the jail. So what is that if not stoking sectarian terrorism? So this whole myth that the Iraqis were just going to tear each other to pieces anyway because Sunnis don't like Shiites, Tony Blair is just reinforcing a total stereotype and a lie that was basically invented in Washington, D.C., okay, and then put out into the media, into the public to think that these people are hopeless in Iraq. We need to, go in and sort them out. Yeah. We need to remove their leader, and then we need to manage the rebuilding process of the country and hand out $1.1 billion in contracts to British companies, and I don't know how many tens of billions of dollars in contracts to American companies yeah. to rebuild the destruction which Tony Blair, George Bush, and their gangs are responsible for in Iraq. Isn't that the real narrative of this story?
Absolutely. Well, let's bring in this, which is our comment, but it applies totally. We're saying that in Mr. Blair's mind is this, but whatever else I have to say today, two words I will never use are David Kelly. And it's quite remarkable. There doesn't seem to be much mention of Dr. David Kelly within those 2.6 million words. We're still working on it. But a key part of what went wrong, a man dies under mysterious circumstances. Oh, we don't really want to talk about that in the Chilcot inquiry. Shall we just see what Mark Anderson has to say? I know that you will be trying to catch up with this yourself at the moment, but if you've got any comments or feelings about our former illustrious leader, Tony Blair, over to you.
Well, the whole deception, of course, involved Blair as well as George W. Bush and the whole exaggeration of who Saddam Hussein was. Really, the Gulf War was very tragic in a number of ways, and throughout the decades leading up to it, a number of things set the stage for it. But it saw the increased use of depleted uranium munitions by British and American forces, particularly American forces, which has contaminated air, soil, and water for generations. It's led to birth deformities among the embattled Iraqi people, and as you guys said, they should be mentioned first, not last. You had huge burn pits of waste material. You had huge oil well fires. You have sickened U.S. troops, many of which passed on damaged chromosomes to their offspring. And so you have a war that has caused a multi-generational problem, an environmental problem, and the genocide that's involved. And so this was no small matter when March of 2003 U.S. forces went in for shock and awe, and it's still shocking us and awing us. And these kind of reports like the Chilcot report, unfortunately, are just smoke screens and whitewashes to hide the sheer tragedy of this across the ideas of torture, across the ideas of depleted uranium, environmental destruction, birth deformities, and a whole manner of things that are the outcome of this war. And they still have not given us solid numbers on just how many Iraqis have died.
Yeah. This is absolutely true, and estimates that are even mentioned in the paper are in the sort of 100,000, hundreds of thousands, when of course we've got sources on the internet which are pointing without any problem at all at millions of people as the horrors have gone on. Well, just to remind people as to some of the key points around the dodgy dossier and Iraq, we thought we'd just bring in a diagram to try and clarify a few of the key players and pieces. Well, of course, Prime Minister Tony Blair's got to take centre stage. And what started the problem? Well, it was the 24th of September 2002 so-called Blair government dodgy dossier. And where did this come from? Well, of course, this was initially put together with information from the intelligence services. And Sir John Scarlett here, chief of the intelligence services, 2004-9, one of the key figures in this. We'll also bring in Alastair Campbell, of course. Now, he's been rubbing his hands together and also pointing at the Chilcot inquiry report and saying, well, this exonerates me. I didn't do anything wrong, Gov. We didn't lie. We didn't falsify anything. So he's sitting pretty happy. But at the time, he was fully involved in the dodgy dossier. So the two key points that caused the trouble were the lie over weapons of mass destruction being deployable within 45 minutes. And the other one was the fact that uranium from Africa was supposed to have been obtained by the Saddam regime. Let's bring in Dr. Kelly, because nobody else wants to talk about this man. And of course, what did he do as a biological warfare expert? Well, he utterly dismissed the 45-minute claim on weapons of mass destruction, a claim that they could be launched from just 45 minutes of somebody in Iraq making the decision. And he was the man also accused of allegations of releasing information that the government did indeed sex up the intelligence regarding those weapons of mass destruction. Well, what happened? He committed suicide, except, of course, that many, many people say this can't possibly be true. We had an investigation, the Hutton inquiry, and what did that do? Well, it said he committed suicide, but it then closed all the evidence for 70 years. So that was obviously a reliable little piece of investigation. And we'd just like to bring in this man, Lord Butler, because Tony Blair tasked him to undertake a review into intelligence used in Iraq in the run-up to the Iraq War and the use of weapons of mass destruction. That was set up by Blair on the 4th of July, 2004. And we're going to be coming back to Lord Butler in just a minute. But I think you've got some points here, Patrick, on the yellow cake story, which was one of the key elements of that dodgy dossier.
So you pointed out that one of the key planks in their case was that Saddam could deploy missiles, presumably Scud missiles specifically, in 45 minutes with biological capabilities on the warheads, and could hit, or as Jack Straw said at the time, or British bases in Cyprus.
Cyprus, yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Just completely lunacy, total insanity. So we can knock that down and dismiss it out of hand.
Well, that one got hit pretty hard. Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
So what about the yellow cake and uranium? The object of this was to try to assert that Saddam Hussein was somehow preparing to put together a nuclear weapon.
Bomb, yeah.
As George Bush said, where the smoking gun could turn into a mushroom cloud. And that was that whole narrative, along with Saddam was connected to 9/11, right? So again, more fiction. So yellow cake uranium. Well, the fact that, and mind you, that a lot of this is very, very well known in as early as 2003 and 4. Okay, so
should we read a bit of that for people? We've got
Sure.
part of a Washington Post report here. It says key players in the CIA leak investigation. October the 28th, 2005, a grand jury handed down a 5-year count indictment on the 22-month-long investigation into whether White House officials illegally leaked the identity of Valerie Plame, a covert CIA agent. So we bring her in on screen and take us through the significance of this woman.
Well,
Patrick.
it's significance because her husband, Joseph Wilson, had been investigating this claim of yellow cake uranium sold from Africa to Iraq. And so as kind of a revenge by Dick Cheney, is what a lot of people believe. They outed the identity of his wife, who's a covert CIA agent, thus putting her life in jeopardy, etc. So what did Joe Wilson find? He found out that we're looking at probably a forgery here. Okay, who provided the documents or the invoices or
regarding the yellow cake?
Regarding yellow cake, Italian military intelligence. So they seem to be able in that key place to fix that little piece of evidence. So this is an international effort to string together a total fiction
around raw materials for producing nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and so this will to make it a major national world security issue. but it was all fantasy. And anybody who looked at this, Brian, including David Kelly, and experts and members of the public, it's totally unbelievable, totally improbable, even at the time. And millions of people knew this, Brian, in Britain, and said so, and made their voices quite vocal about it. But we have this small cabal of
privy councillors,
of people who are, I don't know, bouncing the fantasies off each other, and they somehow, in their little bubble, it's true.
Yeah.
But in the real world, and even the man on the street, even black cab drivers knew this. This was a big porky pie.
Well, we got some more recent examples because, of course, Conservative MP Brooks Newmark claimed in the Daily Mail that chemical weapons had been used in Syria. When he was challenged, of course, he could provide no evidence whatsoever. Reports he referred to did not say there was irrefutable evidence of the use of those weapons by Assad. So we've got recent examples of this spin coming straight out of the government and into the widespread media. What about links to the sources of these sort of deals?
Well, this is interesting because at the same time, these are close family friends here. Silvio Berlusconi, this is just after he had his hair transplant. Why he's wearing a bandana over his head. He's had some hair surgery, I guess.
As you do. Been
under the tanning bed a little bit longer than Donald Trump, by the looks of it. And then there's Tony, and they're I guess that's at Silvia's villa in Italy, I guess, or where he has his parties or whatever. So good family friends. They're all very tight. This is an international group. They have somehow done something together here in 2003, and through that forged these wonderful relationships of international business and power. Rupert Murdoch, Silvio Berlusconi, key-man Tony Blair, and you can see Sherry there in the black background. But isn't it interesting how they come out of this complete
celebrity politicians,
a total scam of the likes the world's never seen before, and this is what you get a year later or 2 years later, gallivanting around the globe.
But Berlusconi, people pointing fingers at him as a fixer of very high level, very dirty deals.
He is indeed. So he is the Rupert Murdoch of Italy, who happened to be running the country as well.
Right.
So,
well, you've mentioned the man's name, so let's bring him alongside Tony Blair. And of course, this was a report. Can I read it? 2012. I think it's May time. The Mail was reporting that Blair took 3 calls from Rupert Murdoch in Iraq build-up, and Alastair Campbell tells the Leveson inquiry that. So we now see a cosy little relation. You need a bit of press to help ramp up the rhetoric for war.
Sure.
And here are the 2 penguins.
So Rupert sells the war. He does his job on his end. Tony does his job. Silvio does his job. Everyone else does their little role, plays their little role, and then pushes this thing through. All together. After all, this is a team effort. It's one big team.
You can't do the politics unless you've got the media on your side. So we're getting a picture now. This is really a political criminal conspiracy going on around the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. Let's remember this Lord Butler. This is very important. So Tony Blair decides that there should be some sort of inquiry into what was going on. This is the man he chose, Lord Butler of Brockwell. I get a bit confused with all the titles, even though I'm British, but there we go. Anyway, he was the chairman. Who was put alongside him? Field Marshal the Lord Inge, former Chief of the Defence Staff. And we've got Michael Mates. Now, he was Conservative MP, former Northern Ireland Minister, pro-invasion, so pretty good person to have on your team. And he had a friend, here she is, Anne Taylor, Labour MP, but pro-invasion, and she just happened to be chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee at the time. So this is clearly an independent team here. But let's bring in this man. Oh dear, in the middle of this lot, we have John Chilcot himself. So he's already been part of an investigation which found there was nothing wrong. Of course, this meeting was not public. It was held in secret, and it didn't produce any evidence. It simply gave us the conclusions of these chosen, trusted people.
Why change the game plan, Brian, when it's going so well?
Absolutely. Except we're hopefully going to disturb that little going so well, because once you start to peel apart the banana, it's pretty easy to see that there's something absolutely rotten inside. So bring in the BBC, the greatest propaganda machine of all time. And here we are with the BBC bigging up Lord Butler, Iraq inquiry, Tony Blair misused. He didn't really do anything wrong. He misused Iraq intelligence. It was all the fault of the security services. So let's have a look at what he said. Tony Blair misused intelligence about Iraq's weapons capability in the run-up to the 2003 war, but did not deliberately deceive Parliament. And what do they say? A former top civil servant has said. The BBC doesn't tell you that Lord Butler was used as part of the original cover-up, that anything was wrong. He said the PM exaggerated evidence of weapons and mass destruction, but he and others believed it. So we had a delusional Prime Minister who believed his own rhetoric. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? And I just want more to add on that, if we can. Let's bring in this one. Butler said you can see the mistakes that deceived the intelligent community into thinking Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destructions. But I've talked to the agencies, and I hope they've learnt lessons from that. This is the most pathetic language, as if the public are 3-year-olds. I mean, this is disgraceful stuff. What does this man look like? Well, this is what he looks like. And what has he also said? Well, he said, well, there was chaos at the end of the war. Chaos is people being raped, murdered, tortured, and dying. But you Americans were to blame for that, Patrick.
So again, just passing the buck. The important point to make here is America could not have moved forward with the Iraq War if not for the fact that Britain had given the green light first.
Yeah, we give it the veneer of respectability. The Americans have got the muscle. You guys have got the military equipment to do it. But you just need that little bit of finesse over the top in order to get in there.
Britain's the brains, America's the muscle, America has the money and the hardware, but Britain is the key, because the coalition Tony Blair was boasting about in his heart-wrenching mea culpa yesterday, the coalition, the invasion, he says 40-something countries. There's only 4 countries. There was the U.S., 150,000 troops, the UK, 40 to 45,000, Australia 2,000, Poland 200. That was the coalition.
Yeah,
they managed to pull Poland in just to make it look like, to give it a bit of color, but really it's the U.S., the UK, and Australia is really just a subsidiary of the UK, basically. Yeah. So it's the U.S. and the UK. That's the coalition. But the U.S. can never be seen to be going it alone internationally. Therefore, they need Britain. They needed Britain in August 2013. To go into Syria. They didn't get it. Guess what the U.S. did? They didn't go.
Big problem.
They didn't go. So this is how it works.
Let's bring in Mark Anderson. You're to blame, apparently, Mark. So please reply to that accusation. And then I think you're going to take a look at American Free Press and Hillary.
The United States, of course, has a big share of blame in this, and I think Patrick outlined it well. The U.S. is largely the muscle, with Britain providing the brains, and Canadians are used, and they build a coalition to make it look more respectable. What you're showing here, and readers and viewers and listeners can read more at AmericanFreePress.net, is a story that was a total exclusive for AFP. July 1st, a noted journalist and author, Alison Weir, spoke in the largely Muslim community of Dearborn, Michigan. And I went over there with my assistant, Angie, and we covered a speech by this author, Alison Weir. And she's operating under the umbrella of a 501c3 organization known as If Americans Knew. And a lot could be said of this. Again, people can go to AmericanFreePress.net to hear a video of her speech and read a short article that accompanies that video. But what's really relevant for today's discussion here on the UK column is that what she had to say included a report known as the staggering cost of Israeli aid to America. And in that, and this ties right in, it says, many experts believe that the U.S. would not have invaded Iraq without intense and sustained pressure from Washington insiders who advocated actively on behalf of Israel. And that includes, of course, the well-known lobby, the unregistered foreign lobby in the U.S., illegally unregistered, and that's known as the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. And this is what is said in this very authoritative and detailed report that accompanied copies of Alison Weir's book. And it goes on to say that this invasion of Iraq in 2003, and remember, that was Gulf War II. There was also Gulf War I, where we left Saddam in power, and then we went back into Iraq in 2003. We mustn't forget that. There were two Gulf Wars with this depleted uranium environmental destruction, with the birth deformities, with British and American vets coming home with arms and legs missing, facial features deformed, and disfigurement. Remember this. And so then we have the staggering cost, hundreds of billions of dollars, 4,000 plus U.S. and allied fatalities. That number's way low, by the way. Untold tens of thousands of Iraqi deaths, and many thousands of other U.S. allied and Iraqi casualties. And get this, Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and Harvard professor Linda Bilmes say the Iraq war, the total cost in dollars is over $3 trillion, with a T, 3 trillion. So this is the relevant part for today's discussion, the most relevant part from Alison Weir's speech July 1st in Dearborn. And it was a very stirring speech, about 250 people there. Read the details here, the video at AmericanFreePress.net. But it's also noted that a lot of roots of the roots of the Middle East instability were planted long ago. And what's really amazing in this report that accompanied her book is one of the most devastating indirect costs, I'm reading from it, of the U.S. relationship with Israel was the Arab oil boycott of 1973, according to this report's authors. Get this, the Arab states imposed the boycott. That's, you know, the long lines waiting in gas stations in America in the early 70s. The Arab states imposed the boycott in protest of U.S. support of Israel during the 1973 war, in which Arab countries attacked Israel to try to reclaim lands that Israel had invaded and occupied back in 1967. And that was the year, of course, that Israeli planes knowingly and willfully attacked the U.S. ship, the USS Liberty, in June of 1967. So Americans were waiting in line for ration gasoline, in part, according to this report, in part due to Israel having seized lands, and then the Arab nations retaliated and enforced that oil boycott in '73 in protest of our support for Israel. And so there's a lot that goes into the history leading up to both Gulf Wars and onward to the present.
Right, thank you for that, Mark. We'll just bring up that American Free Press article. Here's the Michigan address so that people can go and source that and have a read. And there is a whole story, isn't there, around the relationship with Israel that we're simply not told. Conservative friends of Israel, Labour friends of Israel, tremendous influence through the British political system and the American political system. We don't even have to talk about anything hostile. It's the whole point that a nation state is able to influence our politics, not from the outside where everything is visible, but you do it from the inside. This is the bit that I find particularly interesting. If we had conservative friends of Italy and we knew that Italian politicians were influencing our policy, I think people would get pretty upset. But Israel, oh no, you mustn't speak about that. Well, take us through to the lovely Hillary Clinton, because of course, just like Tony Blair, she's whiter than white, as shown.
Very well put, Brian. There's a lot of ties to what I just got done saying and to Hillary. During her time as Secretary of State, according to this article posted on the website that the author Alison Weir referred to at the Dearborn rally, If Americans Knew, that's her 501c3, and this is the related website, ifamericans.knew.org. And James Petras, a sociology professor, has posted this article you're showing on your screen, and I'm reading from it on my computer right now. And this article gets into a whole hornet's nest of things, and the intrigue and the mischief and the apparent treason conducted by Hillary Clinton during her days as the U.S. top diplomat is staggering. And I would invite people to go to ifamericansknew.org, no connection to American Free Press, and read this and make up your own mind. But a number of things could be said, and one, of course, is that under her, the other high person in the Secretary of State apparatus, Victoria Nuland, was, under Hillary Clinton, was actively involved in destabilizing Ukraine and overthrowing the leadership there and putting in this current repellent regime consisting of Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko. And also, Petrus gets into a number of things, including saying that, quote, Hillary Clinton was deeply engaged in private computer-based exchanges on her private server with several unsavory overseas political regimes, including Saudi Arabia, Israel, Honduras, and Turkey, involving covert, violent, and illegal activities. Clinton's correspondence, I quote, with the Honduran armed forces and brutal oligarchs led to the military coup against the elected president Zelaya, its violent aftermath, and the phony election of a pliable puppet. And I could go on and on. There's much here to read and much here to take in. Nothing like, of course, the many million word report you guys are referring to, the Chilcot thing. But nevertheless, it goes on to say Secretary Clinton's email would have shown her commitment to the Saudis when they brutally invaded Bahrain and Yemen to suppress independent civil society organizations and to suppress regional political rivals. But of course, Hillary erased over 30,000 emails, and Donald Trump, like him or not, has rightly called attention to her erasing over 30,000 emails and having sent top secret documents. And she had access to all the most sensitive Pentagon documents. She had access to all the most sensitive Treasury documents. And no one knows where her private exchanges went because of her erasure of all this. But apparently what Dr. Petrus is saying here, Professor Petrus, is that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that she sent sensitive documentation as well as personal information over her private server. The personal information, of course, could be used to blackmail her or somehow influence her, and then the government operation that she sent on the private server, evidently, according to this article, has aided a number of very unsavory regimes. And that includes, of course, the Israeli regime. And the professor goes on to say Hillary Clinton's entire political career has been intimately dependent on Zionist money, Zionist mass media propaganda, which includes Rupert Murdoch, of course, and Zionist Democratic Party operations, and on and on and on. So he goes on to say, in exchange for Clinton's dependence on political support from the Zionist power configuration in the U.S., she would have been a major conduit of confidential information from the U.S. to Israel and the transmission belt promoting Israeli-centric policies within the U.S. government. And Professor Petrus actually goes on to accuse Hillary of espionage. He uses the word espionage.
Okay, well, it's incredible how this stuff is beginning to break surface, Mark. At least it is starting to come to the surface, and obviously it's beholden on all of us, the wider public in the States and Britain, to stay on the case. Before I let you come in, Patrick, just a quick advert here that Ian Crane has now got his AV7 video collection available. We're delighted to be able to offer that through the ukcolumn website. So if you're interested in catching up on those excellent speakers and their various presentations, you can do that via ukcolumn. Well, politicization of intelligence, I think, is the theme, Patrick.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at here. So here's the point, okay?
Shall I just read that out
Sure.
for listeners? Politicization of intelligence reporting evidence from the Cold War. And it's from Oliver Latham, University of Cambridge. So this is a quality paper talking about what's going on.
And what this paper is, and anyone can go and find this online, by the way, but what this paper does is it just chronicles this pattern over history where intelligence has always been politicized whenever there's war involved. This is looking at Vietnam in the United States. This is even looking at the Cold War, Brian, where these huge inflations of Soviet nuclear stockpiles were commonplace in Western lore, but also looking at Iraq specifically, and other examples too. So this is not the exception, Brian. This is the rule, okay? And I think what's condescending and insulting about the tone of the Chilcot report is that it's trying to fashion this together and to portray some sort of like, oh, this was a sort of bump in the road of justice and democracy. This is the norm.
Yeah.
And what the Chilcot report done is downplayed what is the normal dirty practice of government, specifically the United States and its coalition allies, to basically grease the tracks for any war
that they want
on their schedule of wars. Okay, that's exactly what I think happened, and I think this is what Chilcot's trying to soften the reality of.
And they did want it. We've got a hint from it here. Oh, beg your pardon. Okay, I've put it over the top there. But Tony Blair showed little appetite to ensure the Iraq war was legal, Chilcot report says. Lovely language, isn't it? Little appetite. The Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, twice sent Tony Blair legal advice which no one else saw. That's pretty interesting. Then when called upon to provide an opinion, he first of all said the UN would have to pass a new resolution authorising the war, but he changed his mind a few days later. But I believe he didn't put the change of mind in writing.
He conveniently didn't put it in writing. This is the key guy here, Lord Goldsmith. If you remember the run-up to this war, everyone was hanging on his whatever he was going to come out with a couple of days before. So he 6 days or 2 weeks, 2 weeks before the war, he basically changed his mind. Before he said we need another UN resolution because the previous one, 1442, which was passed in November 2002, wasn't enough, wasn't sustainable. We need another resolution to back it. Otherwise, this will not be seen as legitimate by international law. That was his opinion up to a week or 10 days before the
and it went wobbly.
And then he went wobbly conveniently at the end and didn't put it in writing, and no one saw it, and unbelievable. So but the resolution, the original resolution was that Saddam must comply with international regulations in terms of weapons inspecting. So Tony Blair is saying he unequivocally believed, he said in writing, this was delivered by his private secretary only days before this in March, unequivocally believed that Saddam Hussein was in violation of Resolution 1441. That is Tony Blair in his own words in writing. Okay, but yet there's no evidence to support that. So
I'm just going to say this is a key thing, isn't it? Because we can't have intelligence organisations working totally in public. That's impossible. What you have to say is they get licence to act within some controls, and they've got to be 100% spot on, because people die when they make mistakes or they fiddle the books. So what we've got happening now is the evidence coming to the surface. It wasn't just mistakes. We had the politicisation of intelligence, death, genocide on the top of it. But what's Chilcot saying? Oh, we just need to learn a few lessons. No, we need to get some people into court over this. Now, you've got this article, the Winnebago of Death. Okay. This is how it is spun, isn't it? This is the rhetoric.
Sure. No, this is important. This is important to point out.
It's Britain. You probably need to explain what a Winnebago is.
Okay. Yeah, a Winnebago is what do you call it here? A camper? What do you?
Camper wagon. A camper wagon.
It's a giant camper wagon.
Giant.
That retired people drive around endlessly in America on 8 miles to the gallon. So Colin Powell got up in front of the United Nations. We'll show his picture in a second, but this is one of the big things with Yellow Cake. So Saddam was connected to 9/11, lie. Yellow Cake in Niger sold to Saddam, lie. And with the other one that we pointed out before was a lie. The other one was the Winnebagos of Death, mobile anthrax labs, mobile biological weapons labs. Now this was known before the war, Brian. You look at the date of this article is in 2005, but we're going to reference things that happened in January 2003. So everyone knew this was bogus.
Right, let's bring in one of these fine vehicles here. This was the description of it. And this was apparently what was going to be used. So the joke is that it's a sort of camper wagon of chemical warfare.
So there was tons of these infographics being punted around the tabloids, and if you remember, The Sun and basically, these were Colin Powell's Winnebagos of Death, mobile anthrax labs that could be deployed at any second, making tons of dry anthrax to use against the people of Iraq and anyone else, because that's what evil men do, we're told. So this is the Hollywood level of fiction and complete buffoonery in terms of a narrative, and they try to shove it down the public's throat as fact and intelligence. And this was debunked very early on in America, but yet the American intelligence, what George Tenet was pushing as CIA director, by the way, these are all political appointees, the heads of all of these, I don't know about Britain, but in America, it is a political appointment. So George Tenet was appointed by the Bush administration to give them the answers that they want. So it's not even a question of sexing up documents from one, trying to split the intelligence agency and the politicians. They are one because they appointed those heads.
Right.
So they're politicized by the nature of their appointment. It's very important to make that fact clear. But what we have is shoddy, underhanded, fraudulent, it's not intelligence.
Right, that's the reality under the surface. Let's have a look at what the politicians say to the public here. So we got...
This is at the UN, Brian.
This is at the UN. Colin Powell, former US Secretary for State. We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels and rails. The trucks and train cars are easily moved and are designed to evade detection by inspectors. In a matter of months, they can produce a quantity of biological poison equal to the entire amount that Iraq claimed to have produced in the years prior to the Gulf War. And I think there's another one here. Ladies and gentlemen, these are sophisticated facilities. For example, they can produce anthrax and botulism toxin.
In his imagination, they can produce all these things.
Right, and we'll just mention, again, we had Brooks Newmark, of course, claiming in the Mail, same sort of thing, Assad had used chemical weapons. Well, this is a really interesting statement here that you've called forward from William Rivers Pitt. In June 2003, the UK Guardian reported an official British investigation into 2 trailers found in northern Iraq has concluded they are not mobile germ warfare labs, as was claimed by Tony Blair and President George Bush, but were for the production of hydrogen to fill artillery balloons, as the Iraqis have continued to insist. The revelation that the mobile labs were to produce hydrogen for artillery balloons will also cause discomfort for the British authorities because the Iraqi army's original system was sold to it by the British company Marconi Command and Control. Oh, there you go.
Fancy that. So that's William Rivers Pitt. Now, he's been writing about this since before the war. So this is followed up by Dr. Brad Spencer. In conclusion, Bush was relying on the CIA white paper about these mobile biological weapons. This is what George Tenet was relying on, that purported to conclude that the trailers found in Iraq were mobile biological culture systems, said Spencer. That's the only apparent hard evidence he ever cited, okay? And it was false from the beginning. There are obvious fabrications in the white papers, fabrications that fly in the face of science. It's garbage. It's a lie. This has been known for a very long time, at least before the Chilcot report was even started. Okay,
yeah.
This is all out there. Is the point, Brian?
It's out there, but it's in a big soup, isn't it? It's a very murky pond. We need to bring it together, back in front of the public eye.
What I just read to you there from Brad Spencer is common knowledge in public. So why is it common knowledge in public? And in government, they're still questioning and debating if it's real or not.
Well, I believe because the government only reacts when it is public, if the public pick them up on it and point to it. If the public doesn't comment on it, they just carry on as normal. Now, Mark, I'll just give you a very quick reply on that. I'm clock watching at the moment. I've got a couple more people to bring on screen. But what's your feeling on fabricated evidence to generate the Iraq War?
It was stacked very high, this fabricated evidence, everything from yellow cake to the germ weapons of mass destruction claim, to the claim that Saddam had something to do with 9/11, onward to the RVs with anthrax and whatever other terrible agents we're talking about. So it's just a myriad of lies. And, you know, one thing I'll just mention real quickly is even Donald Trump mentioned recently on his campaign that Saddam, whatever his faults, and nobody's saying he's a great guy. In fact, Dick Cheney and earlier regimes supported Saddam in their war against Iran back in the 1980s. And we had two Gulf Wars, as I mentioned. They left Saddam in power until the second Gulf War. But Trump was rightly saying that Saddam, for whatever his faults, had a way of keeping the Middle East actually more stable. And Iraq, overall, was a better place before the second Gulf War, certainly before the first one. And the U.S. and British and Western forces have done nothing but make things worse, and these fabrications were the leverage to do that.
I've got to pick you up on that latter bit there, Mark, because I think it was you Americans caused the problem after the war, according to the British anyway.
Well, it's a team effort, and I think we're dissecting it pretty well today to show where the problem lies.
Right.
And of course, we'll keep at that.
Excellent. Well, let's come back right to the heart of the problem. Here is the architect of the dodgy dossier himself, Alastair Campbell, and what's he been saying? Well, 4 inquiries have cleared me of wrongdoing with regard to the weapons of mass destruction dossier presented to Parliament. He did nothing wrong. He's very happy. He's looking a bit rough, but he did nothing wrong. I hope that the allegations we have faced for years of lying and deceit to persuade a reluctant Parliament and country to go to war, or of having an underhand strategy, there you are, Patrick, underhand strategy regarding the respecting weapons expert, Dr. Kelly, are laid to rest. The truth was and remains confirmed today that the so-called sexing up of intelligence never happened. Well, this man's living in fantasy land. He's got to, because he knows that the truth was the exact opposite of what he's trying to say.
So my question to Alastair Campbell is, so the yellow cake wasn't sexed up? The 9/11 claims of Saddam weren't sexed up? The, what else? The Winnebagos of Death?
The weapons of mass destruction.
The 45 minutes or less claim by Straws in the Wind, Jack Straw, that wasn't sexed up? What about it isn't sexed up?
Of course.
Everything is sexed up. It's all sexed up.
That's why these people have got to live in their own reality. And let's really hammer the Chilcot report, because if you get into it, it's not clear whether you are simply reading narrative or you're being directed to real evidence. And in this particular piece of text, it talks about the Joint Intelligence Committee key judgments at the bottom of the page. I should have arrowed that, but we're just looking at the paragraph at the bottom of the page, and it then lists them. So this is narrative. This is not the real documents. It lists the opinion of the Chilcot about what was written. They do give you some references at the bottom. So here you think you're going to go to real evidence. What it takes you to is this. And apparently this is a top secret document which has been declassified. But this is utter nonsense, Patrick. What this is some digital creation of a document. This is not a real document, and this would have no standing in a court of law. It's not the original document. It's not a photograph of the original document. It's not a photocopy. This is a created text, and we have absolutely no way of knowing if it is true or if it has been manipulated in the style of the dodgy dossier. So that so-called top secret declassified document would have no standing whatsoever in a court of law. It's complete nonsense.
When you read through these two particular ones you showed me here, you get the feeling you're reading something that has been heavily sanitized for public display. This isn't classified.
Well, you produce 2.6 million words because that's the soup. You can bury anything in that. You can debate it for the next thousands of years. Chilcot, the man who Blair initially used to help spin that he did nothing wrong, is then used again to produce 2.6 million words. And in the Chilcot report, this is the bit which is breathtaking, he refers in part to the Butler report as if he didn't really take part in that report. This is disgusting stuff. And I think we better end with a picture of Tony Blair here, because far from Saddam being evil, this is the evil British Prime Minister. He's still free. How long he stays free is going to depend on us. It's going to depend on good men and women in Britain. If we do nothing, this man is going to continue to become a millionaire, billionaire, sniggering at the nation when he should be in prison. Mark, I'll give you just 10 seconds on Chilcot and or Mr. Blair.
Like many of these reports, it's he said, she said. It's never getting to the bottom of the issue. I don't see any graphics. I don't see any data. Granted, I only saw a couple pages on the screen here, but it's always, they release something like they're doing something, but they're not really doing anything. And it's made to debate and to just go into the netherworld and never reach a conclusion. That's the way the news media operates. That's the way their allies in government operate. Words, words, words forever, but no conclusions, nothing concrete, no justice, no settling and true clearing of the issue.
Patrick.
My final assessment of this is the Chilcot report is a big, giant non-event. It's nothing. So what do we get? Inquests, we get inquiries, we get reports. And in America, we get commissions. And you know what you get after a commission in America? You get a stack of books like this, no convictions, nobody ever is held accountable, no one will take responsibility for anything that was done or how many people were killed. This is the norm. So when you see that we're going to launch an inquiry, it's almost like a running joke.
Yeah.
Okay. The bottom line is Tony Blair was the key man to subvert due process and subvert democracy in the process as well, and to create an environment of international lawlessness. He opened the gates. I'll use this term. He opened the gates of hell in 2003. And look around the world now. Look how many conflicts there are simultaneously now. Look at countries that are just completely outside of any rule of law internationally. Like, look at Saudi Arabia. They're literally destroying their neighbor, Yemen, and not being pulled up by the UN.
All pulled up by the US and Britain, of course. Patrick, Mark, thank you very much for joining us. We'll leave it there. Chilcot, a complete and utter farce in order to cover up the real causes of the war and the genocide. And there we have it. Prime Minister Tony Blair, former Prime Minister Tony Blair, still a free man for how much longer? Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.